Hi everyone. Today we're going to be taking the next step in our Java journey and we're going to be making our own objects. Yes, you heard that right. We're making our own objects. Thus far, the objects that we've been working with have been those that come with the Java language, such as strings, random, and scanner. Technically, we've been making our own objects, but really those have just been wrapped around our main method, so we haven't really used a lot of the Java language's object-oriented principles. So in today's video, we're going to start introducing that by making our own object that our main method's going to call into. We're going to make objects that hold data for pets, and we're going to be manipulating those objects to show a few of the things that an object can do within the Java language. So like previously, we're going to be using the IntelliJ IDE, and we're going to create a new project. We'll call this Intro to Objects. Note that we're using the upper camel case that we've talked about previously for our names. In the code directory, add sample code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the main class that the IDE generated for us. We're going to remove system.out.println. And now we're going to add a line of code which is going to use our new custom defined object that we're about to create. We're going to call it a pet. So we need to create an instance of a pet like we have done with scanners, random, and string. So just for a reminder, when we made a scanner, for instance, we would call it scanner and then we would give it a variable name and then we'd use the constructor defined for that object type. And then we would import it and then we would wrap it in the parameters that it needed in order to successfully construct that object. This time what we're going to do is instead of using a scanner, we're going to make a pet. And so far the pet's not going to take any parameters in this constructor, the thing that builds our objects. And we're going to go ahead and give it a name. We'll call it pet1. So the first thing you'll notice here is that IntelliJ doesn't know what the pet object is. Okay, that's fine because we haven't defined it yet. It's saying we could create a class, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to the source directory, right-click, new Java class, and we'll call it pet. So you'll notice that doing that, now the errors are gone in our main method, and we have a new file called pet.java. If you remember from one of our earlier videos, there is one file per public class at the top definition of a file. So that's why we have a new pet.java file to hold the pet class. All right, so now we've made our class. Let's go back to main. We can do that in Windows via Control Tab. And I want to do something with my pet object. I want to print some information. Now what I just did here is I'm calling variable name dot, and remember we talked about what the dot operator does. It allows a program to access certain elements within our objects, whether those are other variables that our objects hold or what we call methods. But you'll see that IntelliJ is giving an error. It doesn't know what the printinfo method is. And that's because in our pet.java here, it doesn't have a printinfo method. So we need to go in and define what this is. IntelliJ can help us with that. If we click here, create method, it creates a method for us. And lo and behold, the error goes away. But let's look at what method it actually created for us in the pet class here. Public. So we've talked about what public means. That means that other objects outside of this current one can access it. So okay, that means that main can access the following method. Void means that it's not going to return anything. And then this is the actual name of the method, and these parentheses indicate that it's not taking any parameters. And then the empty contents within these curly braces are saying that the method isn't doing anything currently. So if I were to run this code as an example, I would expect it to print no output. All right, and there we have it. No output currently, but we are creating our object. So let's actually have that method do something next. So I do see we have a warning here. If I go to problems, If I double click on this, this is saying that I have an unused import statement because we had to import the scanner class earlier in order to demonstrate what creating a new scanner looked like. We had to do this import, but we don't need it anymore because we're not using the scanner class. So I'm going to remove that. And now our warning goes away. Very good. All right, so now I want to have the print info method actually do something. If I want to go to the implementation of a method, a nice way to do that in IntelliJ is if you hold Control and you hover over something. If you click on it, it takes you to the method. So now I want to print some information about this pet, but I don't really have any information. So I'm just going to say to system.out TBD right now because I don't really know what sort of data I actually have for this pet. So I make a pet. I'm printing some information about it, but it doesn't have any actual data associated with it. So what gives? Okay, let's go ahead and make this pet actually have some information associated. Let's give it a name. So I actually have two cats. I have one named Rotimer and another named Twisty. We'll start with Rotimer first. But if I put in this string here, it says that the pet constructor expected 0 arguments, but I gave it 1 argument. Now, one thing you'll notice is I don't have anything in here that defines what that constructor's doing. And the reason for that is because Java by default has a default constructor that it creates for you. So when you don't have any parameters, the default constructor is created for you automatically. You don't need to worry about it. But now that we're adding parameters to our constructor, we need to no longer use the default constructor and we need to define one ourselves. So I can have IntelliJ help us out here again, and if I do create constructor, then now we have a constructor here. Now a constructor is the method that gets called when you're trying to create an instance of your object. You'll notice you're using that new operator right there. You're creating a new instance of a pet called pet, and you're passing in these parameters. So therefore you're going to call the constructor whose parameter list matches what you're using. In this case, the IDE automatically generated a public constructor, so we can call it from outside of this class. And the other thing you'll notice is that constructors don't have a return value. That's intentional because constructors implicitly return an instance of the object type, and you don't need to include a return statement saying that because at the end of the construction process, the object is now created. The expectation is that when a constructor finishes, everything that is needed in order for that object to start being used by an outside program is now available. So I don't really like the name of the variable that the IDE put in here. It called this Rotimer. Really, this should be name. Because the intent here was I wanted the constructor first parameter to be the name of the pet. So you can see here IntelliJ does some nice hints for us. It's saying this is what the name variable is, and it is equal to Rotimer. This isn't actually included in the source code. This is more just a hint for you, kind of like how it says no usages here and here. This is just an indication of what variable this particular value is pointing to. So now that I've passed in a name for my pet, I want to be able to indicate my pet's name in the print info method. So how do I do that? Now that I've passed in a variable name, I want to set that variable name to something that I can remember in my class so that when I need to access it in the print info method, I can then use it. So I'm going to create another variable that holds the value of name. Now I'm going to call that variable for now my var, and it's going to equal name. Okay, I need to define what my var is. I could do it here, but what good does that do me? Because now my var is only in scope of the current function. I can't use my var down here. And the reason I can't do that is because the symbol my var is only defined within the pet constructor. So what I need to do is I need to actually extract this variable. I need to have it be what's called a field. So in order to make a field rather than a local variable like my var currently is, I need to go in and define the variable within the context of the class rather than the constructor or an individual method. Now you'll notice I'm not getting any errors here, and that's because of what's called variable scoping. So we have a field here, and then we have a local variable where the local variable actually takes precedent over the field, but this is very confusing because now I have a situation where I've got a local variable and a field with the same name. If I get rid of the declaration of the variable, now it knows to look for my field, and you can see it highlights it differently. This is IntelliJ's highlighting this kind of purple maroonish color that we have a field. We've seen that elsewhere in this out right here. Out is actually a field within the system class. So now if we were to compile this code, we want to go to the main function again, hit run. And what you'll notice this time is we're actually going to print out the name of our pet. All right, very good. There it is. Now I want to change a couple things here. I'm going to go back to the pet class. And typically when we have fields here, we want to be very explicit with who can get access to our fields. So usually when you have a variable like this, more often than not, you don't want anyone outside of the class being able to modify it. So what we can do is if we declare the myvar string private, now if our main class attempted to access the myvar variable, it's not going to be able to access it. It says myvar has private access in pet, therefore main can no longer access myvar. I don't really like how myvar is called myvar because it's not very intuitive. When I look at the print info method, I'm just printing out myvar. I want that to be a little more descriptive. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, refactor, rename. And now the IDE will rename every instance of this field with the new name that I type in. And I'm going to call it name. And IntelliJ just did something very sneaky for us right here. You're wondering what this dot might be? If you look at what it had previously, it would have done this. Now you'll notice we've got a warning, and the warning is we are assigning name to itself. We talked about the reason of why this could happen, and that's because when you have a field versus a local variable, the local variable takes precedence over the field. So you have a situation like this where you have a field with a certain name and you have a local variable with the same name, and now Java can't differentiate which one you want. So IntelliJ fixed this for us automatically, but the way that you do fix that is you type this dot. And what this dot means is this is the current instance of the object that you are actively creating. So this corresponds with the pet object that we are actively creating, and within the object we're creating, we want to access the name field. So now we're saying the name field needs to equal the name that is getting locally passed into this constructor, and then we reflect it down here. You'll see some people who want to be explicit when they use fields like this, and they would use something like this, where now you're saying this object's name. This is clear as well. Most, I would say, programmers remove the this instance when they're referring to fields and there's no ambiguity. But if you want, you can also do this. I typically prefer not to because it's plenty clear what you're already doing. All right, let's go ahead and comment what this line of code is doing. And let's run our code. And as you can see, the output of our program didn't change. Good. Again, one thing I like to do is while I am writing code, I like to iteratively run it as much as I can. Sometimes you'll get in the trap of running your code after you've made 100 lines of code change, or maybe you are debugging something and you've changed 20 different things at once. I highly recommend while you are starting out learning how to code that you very iteratively are testing your code. That gives you the best insight into when you have broken your code or when you're going down the wrong path or something like that. So moving on to the next thing we want to do in our pet object. Now we know what our pet's name is. Let's also indicate what type of animal our pet is. So in my case, Rotimer is a cat. Now I've got another error which says that I expected one argument, but now I've found two. Instead of having the IDE automatically do it for us this time, let's do it manually. So since we are now passing in two parameters, I need to pass in a second parameter, and I'm going to call this one type. If I go back here, now the IDE is showing this is the type of pet we're talking about. So kind of like before, I'm going to create another field. We're going to call it type, and we're going to explicitly say this dot type. So now the field is equal to the local value that we're setting. And we're going to update this comment. And why don't we add in a little more in this print statement here? Let's go ahead and say this. And now we're going to use the formatted string. And we're going to say that this is the type. So this animal, this cat in our case, is named %s name. And then we're going to throw in a new line at the end. All right, let's run our code, make sure this works. All right, very good. Now I want to add the age of my pet. So I believe, let's see, Rotimer is going to be 8. So now I'm going to go back to my constructor, and now I'm passing in an integer. So I'm going to say int age. Like last time, I'm going to make another field. I'll make this one private as well. It has to be an integer because we want the types to match. And age equals age. One thing I glossed over a little bit when talking about these fields is that there's this yellow highlighting, and it's asking, can we make the name field final? And yes, I think we should. What the final keyword means is that now you have a variable that is read-only. How does that really matter? Well, it's actually a lot more important than you might think. Think about a case where you're writing some code and you make a variable and you're really not wanting it to change. Then someone down the line goes and changes your variable in a way you don't expect, and now your code breaks because you didn't expect the variable to change from underneath you. Using the final keyword within Java is a way to help reinforce that you're not going to have that happen. So in practice, I typically like to make as many variables final as I can in order to make sure that my code is doing what I intend it to do. And in a future video, there are actually plenty of other uses of the word final in other instances. I use that keyword all the time in my code, and down the line, I'll have a video where I can go through all the use cases of where you might use the final keyword and where you wouldn't. But for now, if we look at this, the age is still highlighted. And the reason it's saying that is because age is assigned but never accessed. So it looks like we need to update the printinfo method to actually access our age field. So we will say this cat is named Rotimer and is that many years old. All right. So now that should go away. And now we have an age value. Let's go ahead and run this and test it. All right, cool. This looks to be working as I would expect it to. So now I'm going to go ahead and create another pet. I do have two cats. I have one named Rotimer and one named Twisty. So now we're going to go ahead and create pet 2. This one will be named Twisty. She's also a cat. Let's see, she would be 6. And if I print out her information, then we'll make sure that this code is working as intended. All right, great. That seems to be working as expected. Now what I want to do last is I want to show, let's get some data out of our objects and let's do some comparison on that data and then have our main method act accordingly. So now what we're going to do is determine which pet is older. What we're going to do is let's get some local variables, pet 1 age and pet 2 age. Okay, so the age of pet number 1 is going to be pet 1 dot, I don't really have a method for this right now, so let's create one. I want it to be called getAge. I don't have this method currently. I can have the IDE create it for me, and lo and behold, it creates a public method with an int return type called getAge with no parameters, just as I specified, but there's still an error here. And it's saying I'm missing a return statement. So what a return statement does is it indicates what value gets returned from a method to the caller of who initiated the call to that method. So I'm saying return, but now what do I need to return? Well, I'm still missing a return value. I need to do more than just the return keyword. I need to actually return an integer. So what's the age of our pet? Well, it's the age field. So if I return the age field, looks a lot better. And looks like the IDE is happy now. Let's go ahead and grab pet2's age. And then let's print out the 2 ages and make sure that these look good. And whoops, I need to make this a formatted string. All right, looks good. So now let's do some if checks. So if pet1 age is exactly the same as pet2 age, then they are the same age. If pet1 age is greater than pet2 age, then we know that pet1 is older. And otherwise, we know that pet2 is older. Let's go ahead and make sure that this works. All right, lovely. So we can see that pet1 is older, but that's not how I named the pet. That's only the name of a variable. I want to actually use the name of my pet as passed into the pet constructor here. So let's go ahead and pull out the names of each of our pets. Now I don't have a getName function either, so let's have the IDE help us out. Now just like how we got the age, let's return the name this time. Okay, so now we have pet1's name. Let's get pet2's name. Now it's saying that we haven't used these variables yet, so let's go ahead and use them. If I want to make a formatted string, I'll use the %s in order to specify a string. So pet1 name is older than pet2 name. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy that here. And in this case, pet2 is older than pet1. And in this case, pet1 is the same age. All right, let's see if this code works. Perfect. Rotimer is older than Twisty. That is a fact. All right, let's go ahead and, because we're only checking a couple of these conditionals, let's go ahead and throw in a few more tests to make sure that our logic is working as we expect. So in this case, I'm saying Twisty's a dog and she's going to be the same age as Rotimer. All right, the output says that we have a cat named Rotimer and a dog named Twisty, and they're the same age. Let's make Rotimer a fish and make him only 3. All right, now Rotimer is the fish who's 3 years old. Twisty's the dog who is 8 years old, and Twisty's now older than Rotimer. All right, great. This code seems to be working as expected. So this is a basic example of how you develop your own objects and you create a class for your objects, and then you can do different things with your objects. This is mainly what we would call a container object, or sometimes you'll hear them called POJOs, plain old Java objects, where they aren't doing anything super fancy within them. But these are the building blocks for more and more complex objects that go into more and more complex programs as we get further along in our Java journey together. And there you have it. Those are some of the fundamentals of how you create objects within Java and how you access some of their data. There's a lot more that comes with object-oriented programming concepts in Java than this, but I hope this serves as an initial look at some of the things that you can do with objects in Java. In future videos, we can talk about other programming concepts such as inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, and encapsulation. I hope you enjoyed this video content. If you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to drop a comment below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed watching this video, and thank you very much for watching. Take care.